Welcome back to a very British space program. It is the 19th of October 1964, and while the crew of Endurance 1 are in orbit, we're launching some more craft, so join us. So we have just are launching F010. This is a Faraday 2B, and its pilot is Michelle Lloyd. It has the engineer Elaine Lewis on. They're both flying they're both from the third astronaut class that we have, and they're both flying the second time. And interestingly, it's the second time they've flown together, so that's nice. They seem to always end up flying together. They're going to actually go up and do one of our orbital maneuvers missions, and this is basically just gathering some cash, doing some training, doing some learning about what we're doing. They're going to use a slightly modified launch profile, and this is in part because I am aware that I keep leaving upper stages in orbit. Now, obviously, in real life, those craft in low orbit would slowly decay and re-enter and burn up, but because of the fact that I'm not using any clever little atmospheric mods above 140 kilometers, our rubbish is basically staying in orbit. So I do occasionally go through and remove it, but I thought I'd try and do a little bit of a different launch profile, and this is trying to basically waste fuel. I know I could decouple early and thrust, but I want to try and just see if we can get a reasonable amount of energy into the craft, because primarily for this flight we're actually attempting to put the craft into a periaps, over a periaps of 160 kilometers and an apoaps of over 250. So it was just about trying to do that. So there you go. We basically just used the onboard thrusters to try and just pull the craft up into a nice little orbit there, and you can see it just uses its onboard thrusters. Now, these are not that powerful, so it's not a case of, oh, I can finish off a burn with them. I have to be very careful about this, because we could actually start to re-enter if I don't do this in the right profile. So there we go. We hit about 200 kilometers up, and then we use our thrusters to just finish off the circularization, and all is good. And so this crew will spend around 2 days in this orbit right now. They're just going to check their orbits going, but before that we actually have to start all of their fuel cell systems. We do not start them on the ground, primarily because they will not stay started for some reason. I'm not sure if it's this version of realism overhaul or not, but we have to check that. We have to make sure the water dump is actually working correctly, and then we have to make sure the fuel cells are on by turning them on and off a few times. It's very, very technical stuff, obviously. So the craft completes its first 2 days at its initial orbit of 120 kilometers by about 250. It's actually well over that. It's a nice set of orbits, and then it's going to carry on a little burn now, where it's going to lift its apoaps up quite high. Actually, it's going to go up to about 675, or at least 675 kilometers. I think we actually aim for about 700 in the end. One thing I have noticed, and we've had this on a previous craft, was that when we're in time warp, we actually sometimes get a bit of movement of our apoaps and periaps when near Earth, and I'm not entirely sure what's causing that. I would love to know what it is, because it does mean that sometimes you have to keep an eye on the actual contract and reposition the craft. Luckily we didn't have that this time, or if we did, it wasn't big enough. So we're then finishing after 3 days at that new orbit. We're actually going to rotate ourselves round and prepare for return, and this has basically become quite a sort of standard process for us now. It's something we can rattle this craft out very rapidly. They've got about 7 to 8 days of supplies on board, about 7.5 days of supplies on board, so they can pretty much do most of these maneuvering contracts. I'm gonna probably slow down doing them, or I may not include as much of them in the videos. It'd be really good if you could tell me, do you want to see all of these sort of ongoing contracts like this, or do you want to just see the new stuff? Anyway, we orientate into the normal, release our once we're on return path, release our service module, and then we use the remaining RCS on the capsule just to reorientate itself. Now, I am not using offset center of mass for return on this craft at the moment. I'm going to look into it, because it is something that the Gemini had. It had the ability to offset its center of mass, which meant it could sort of position itself to gain a little bit of lift as it was hitting the atmosphere, which allowed it to slow down its sort of re-entry profile, make it a little bit sort of less extreme, shall we say. But From the orbits we're coming in at, it is fine. If we went to higher orbits, I think we would need to have a good look at that, and it's something that maybe this program in particular would be good for. You can just hear there the service module exploding in the background. There we go. And so we're just coming through the, oh, there we go. You'll notice I rotate the craft just because I like to have it oriented correctly. It's slightly off, but it'll do. And we're just coming on through the atmosphere now. There's quite a lot of RCS fire as we do that, which I need to look into. I think there's a slight wobble. I think there might be some clipping somewhere in this craft, which we may see in future episodes. Anyway, we basically turn off the RCS, and we're now making our final descent. Now, obviously, we don't have any retro thrusters or anything on this. It would be something I could possibly do, but I do not have that set up at the moment. And there we go. Parachutes are away, and so we're pretty much just watching them float down now. It's been a successful mission. They've completed their 5 days, well, over 5 days on orbit. All has gone well. So let's move on. Now, talking about 5 days on orbit, we also have the small issue of Endurance. Endurance 1, which has been in orbit now for about 2 weeks. It's had about 14 days. Its supplies are running a little low, obviously. We off camera, I have actually moved the crew back into the command pod, I believe. So they've been able to stay around and use the extra space they've got at the bottom there as their living space. It's still very cramped though. They've obviously got very much used to each other for there. So Kim and Lisa are going to try and return from orbit, but because this is a one-use station, we're actually going to take it down with us. We're going to use it almost like a service module for this process. So we orientate it and we start its return burn. The Endurance 1 will float off for a fiery death. I hate to say this. I was thinking of keeping it up in orbit, but the plan I have for this stations at the moment is that I don't want this one up there. It does not have the long-term capability I want. It's just a stepping stone. You can see the solar panels are fixed. They have to be orientated correctly. It's a little bit annoying. So there you go. We've actually gone into our normal orientation, and we've decoupled not only our service module but the whole of that station craft, and that will actually come, and we'll try and watch that as we come down through the atmosphere. And so again, you're now seeing a second Faraday return. And again, I am not using the offset center of mass approach, but I am orientating the craft. And what I was trying to do here was actually keep a look on the station, because I wanted to see how far through the atmosphere it would go. I am pretty sure it will burn up. It does not have any major components, but we don't want to dump something like a space station on Australia, do we? I mean, that'd be just terrible. And worse would if we dripped it somewhere, like, I don't know, America or somewhere like that, particularly because they'd probably get some of the tech out of it. We have to be careful about that. The Canadians would probably look after us on that one, though. They'd probably pick it up if we went in the ocean or anything. So Kim and Lisa are now the longest sort of orbital crew in the history of our program. I don't believe they hold the record, I think they hold the record now, but we're going to have to extend that a little bit, because 2 weeks is not a long time. Okay, that would allow us a mission to probably the moon, but if we want to do anything more, if we want to do any proper research in space, if we want to make a presence in space, in our space harbours, we need to spend longer, I think, there. So we're going to have to keep up in the ante. We've got some more tech. We want to bring out another Endurance craft. The Endurance range are basically going to be our stepping stone craft. We're not going to really have a long-term Endurance craft that's going to stay up there for a decade, but it's us learning. It's us learning about being in space for long times, and we don't have the best sort of history for that. We've not really pushed long-term sort of crewed time in space, so that's something we need to work on. So with all that going on, you can see a vast amount of RCS fire going on with the Faraday coming back through the atmosphere there. We disengage the RCS and obviously dump the fuel. Obviously, you need to be careful about when you dump it, because being toxic as some of it is, you don't want it coming back into the air vents of the capsule, because that would be an absolute disaster. That has happened, in fact. So we come down into the ocean, and there we go. So 28th of October 1964, we have the retasked Messenger 7. This is going to launch into a parking orbit prior to its departure for Uranus, or whatever you want to call it. And of course, this is part of the UK's changing plans after the emissary debacle, we shall now call it. The emissary mission, obviously the lander, did not perform how we wanted. We're still trying to decide what's going on. The scientists are still having a look at what's there. What have we got available? What can we do? But this craft was obviously going to be slated for the Emissary 2 mission to Mars. We've actually repurposed the booster to send out another Uranus interplanetary mission, just in case we have a problem with the first one. Now, interestingly, we do think that this window might be a better transfer for us, so we may end up actually being thankful that we used this window. It might save us a bit of time. We'll see. The boffins in the sort of mission planning area have been telling us that this is the more optimal time to launch, but we don't really understand how launching a year later than the previous mission is actually going to help us. So anyway, this is actually launched about 2 weeks early because we need to roll out our Pluto mission, which is going to come very soon, and that's going to come in as well. And we've got a bunch of these missions coming up with very short succession. So I think 3 or 4 of them are coming up. So this had to go up a lot earlier, but it was a perfectly nominal launch. It was a standard launch on the Blue Knight 2, and then straight after it, well, not straight after it, on the 4th of November, after being rolled out, we launch Messenger 8, and this is again a Hesperus 4B, and this is going to go into a parking orbit as well, and this is going to be going to Pluto, and this one again is going to spend some time in orbit. We're probably going to be looking again 10 to 14 days. This is replacing using boosters that we had lined up for other missions as well. It's actually using a backup booster. The big change to this Hesperus craft is that we've actually added an uprated communication system. So we're actually using X-band for the first time on this and the previous launch, because they're both using Hesperus 4B upgraded craft, which means we can actually get stuff done. While we launched this, we actually realized that the USSR now is capable to launch multi-person crew, which is a little concerning. So unlike our Javelin and Faraday, they've gone for 3 crew though, which we think is a little bit excessive. Anyway, on to the big one. So after a while and planning and all sorts of concern, on the 9th of November 1964, it is decided that having gone over the data, the emissary team feel that it's actually going to be possible to land on Venus. They've looked at all of the problems. They've looked at the orientation problems. They've looked at the heat shield. They think they can do it. They think it's going to be possible, but it's risky. It's risky because of this. We're actually going to put the whole craft onto a collision course with Venus. Now, this is what we did in the first landing attempt. We did put the whole craft into that orientation. However, you will notice the craft is now orientated so that the lander is in the retrograde position, not the orbiter. That means number one, we couldn't use the main engines because we're now offset. We have to get rid of this lander to actually do anything with the orbiter. At the moment, the orbiter is pretty much unusable. It can do small changes, but those main engines cannot be used because of the offset center of mass. So we've orientated ourselves so the lander and the orbiter are basically going to be coming in retrograde with the lander in position. We're going to move closer towards the atmosphere of Venus, and this is where the risk comes in. It was undecided as to whether the landing was important enough to trigger this. We're going to put our orbiter, our relay satellite, the really important, expensive piece of equipment, on close approach to Venus, very close, and then we're going to rely on that engine, that row engine, which we know doesn't like to relight all the time. We're going to rely upon it to get us out of trouble. So we spin the whole craft up there. You see that? We spun the whole craft up. So we've now got our orbiter in a spin which it has to recover from. It then has to position itself and then use its engines to get itself out of dodge. It has to get itself away. And there we go. We fire the engines and we're just tiny pulsing it, and we've done it. It's now safe. Now, that was the difficult bit. That was the scary bit, because we could have lost 2 craft there. Now we're going to pull in to interact with the atmosphere, our lander. It is now spinning. We're hoping the spin stabilization helps it. We are aware that there is a heating problem on this craft. There is a design flaw that we did not account for. We've got a heat transfer through the heat shield, which we're concerned about. So we need to take off as much energy as possible. So we've spin stabilized this craft, but we're also going to aim for multiple passes. Like the first craft, we're going to go for multiple passes, but with that spin stabilization. The concern is the craft has to try and keep this orientation. We believe the spin stabilization will keep it in its sort of healthy angular window. We can't have it tilt too far, otherwise it will flip. We're hoping the spin stabilization will do that, but we're not sure if it will manage it after multiple passes. So on this first pass, this is going to be the most dangerous one. We have the most energy right now. We're going to be dumping down into the atmosphere. We start to get a build up, the sensors start to heat up, and we notice that it's actually the shield, the sort of shield over the top of the craft and all of the fairing mounts that are heating up. The heat shield is not being effective right now. The heat shield is not actually ablating the way we expect. At this point, we think we may have another fail, but the craft does keep its orientation as it goes through the atmosphere as it comes out the other side. So the team are ready to do another pass. They're ready to see what happens. They're hopeful that this might work, but with that heating, we're going to have to be very careful. This has to be the most gentle of re-entries possible. So it's all up in the air. So if you want to see it, please subscribe, because next episode we're going to see what happens. So from me, from the sort of atmosphere of Venus, until next time, have a great one.